The hidden origin behind the myths: Zeus, Thor, Osiris, Gilgamesh. The gods of the ancient world are everywhere, in temples, in legends, in our modern entertainment. We call them mythology. But what if some of it was memory? What if the stories of powerful beings who came from heaven, intermingled with humanity, and left behind chaos and giants, are not just fiction, but distortion? And what if the one man who walked with God, the man who was taken without seeing death, holds the key to understanding where those stories came from? Today, we are going to explore one of the most controversial and electrifying questions in biblical theology. Was Enoch the origin of the pagan gods? Or to put it another way, did the ancient world take a true story and twist it into worship? Who were the gods of the ancient world? Almost every ancient civilization had a pantheon. The Greeks had Zeus and Apollo. The Egyptians had Horus and Ra. The Sumerians had Enlil and Inanna. The Canaanites had Baal and Asherah. These were not just characters and stories. These gods were feared, worshipped, sacrificed to. They were credited with storms, crops, war, fertility, life, and death. But many of these beings have something in common. They lived in the heavens. They came down to earth. They gave humanity forbidden knowledge. They interbred with mortals. They produced hybrid offspring, and they ruled over cities or kingdoms with divine power. Sound familiar? Because that is almost the exact story that 1 Enoch tells about the Watchers and their children. The Watchers, more than just angels. According to 1 Enoch 6-8, a group of 200 heavenly beings called the Watchers descended to Mount Hermon. They made a pact. They took human women as wives, and they taught humanity secret knowledge, sorcery, root cutting, and herb enchantments, weapons and warfare, astrology, the beautification of women with cosmetics. These Watchers were not sent by God. They rebelled, and their actions produced something even more dangerous: the Nephilim. These were the giants, the men of renown, half human, half angelic hybrids, and their presence on earth led to corruption, bloodshed, and ultimately the flood. 1 Enoch 7:5 says, "They devoured all the toil of men until men could no longer sustain them. Then the giants turned against them and devoured mankind." The Watchers were eventually judged, bound, cast into the abyss, but their memory lingered. Their children left a legacy of destruction, and to the ancient world, their godlike power was never forgotten. The children of the Watchers, demigods, giants, titans. Genesis 6:4 describes them this way: "There were giants on the earth in those days." And also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Men of renown, that is the same phrase used in many ancient texts to describe their greatest heroes and deities. Hercules, the demigod son of Zeus; Gilgamesh, the giant king; Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. These were larger-than-life figures with divine ancestry and human flaws. They were not fully human, and their stories are everywhere. 1 Enoch 15:8 says, "Now the giants, who were born from body and flesh, will be called evil spirits on the earth, and their dwelling will be upon the earth." In other words, the children of the Watchers became the unclean spirits. They died physically, but their influence lived on. Through oral tradition, through carved tablets, through the worship of the masses, the Nephilim became the gods of the nations. Did Enoch influence the pagan pantheons? So where does Enoch come in? Enoch was the one man chosen by God to be the messenger, the mediator. In 1 Enoch 12-15, God sends Enoch to rebuke the Watchers, to pronounce their judgment, to tell them that forgiveness is no longer possible. Chapters 12-15 of 1 Enoch paint one of the most terrifying and important scenes in all ancient literature. Enoch is summoned by the Watchers themselves, not to comfort them, but to deliver their sentence. He is shown the horrors of the abyss, where they will be bound. He sees the future judgment of their children, the giants, and he is told why their sins were so severe. They crossed boundaries heaven never meant to be crossed. Enoch is not just a prophet, he is the messenger of judgment to angels, and that story echoed in fragments across pagan cultures, and may have become the root of the myths we now call gods. Enoch becomes the prophet to the angels. He is shown visions of heaven. He is given knowledge of creation, judgment, and eternity. And he is eventually taken. Genesis 5:24. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But even after he was taken, his word spread. Ancient nations remembered this prophetic figure who spoke to the gods and disappeared. Could Enoch have become the model for figures like Thoth, the Egyptian god of writing and wisdom? Hermes, the Greek messenger of the gods? Idris, the Islamic prophet, believed by some to be Enoch? It is speculation. But it is not wild, because Enoch was the only man in the ancient world described as walking with God, confronting heavenly beings, and vanishing from the earth. His influence may have reached far beyond Israel. The biblical danger of myths and idols. But here is the danger. When the true story fades, myth replaces memory. When truth is suppressed, worship distorts. Romans 1:25 says, "They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator." The Watchers were never gods. Their children were not worthy of temples. Enoch was never divine. But the world forgot that. And in forgetting, it turned fallen angels into gods, demons into heroes, and a faithful prophet into legend. And it still happens today. We glamorize superheroes with demigod powers. We retell the myths as if they are harmless fiction. We underestimate the spiritual forces behind it all. But the Bible tells us clearly, the things the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. 1 Corinthians 10:20. Behind every false god is a fallen being, a deceiver, a remnant of the rebellion that began in Genesis 6. The truth hidden in plain sight. So, was Enoch the origin of the pagan gods? Not directly, but his story may have been twisted, mirrored, and mythologized by cultures who remembered just enough truth to create a lie. The Watchers became the gods, their children became the heroes, and the prophet who stood between heaven and earth was remembered only as a legend. But the real Enoch was never a god. He was a man who walked with God in a time of corruption, a man who warned the world of judgment, and a man who was taken into heaven not because of power, but because of faith. Let us remember Enoch the way Scripture does, not as a god among men, but as a man who refused to worship any god but the one true king. If this video challenged what you thought you knew about ancient myths, or gave you a new way to understand the Bible, don't stop here. Like the video if it helped you connect Scripture with history, subscribe so you don't miss what's next in this unfolding series. And let me know in the comments, do you believe the legends of gods and demigods could be echoes of a forgotten truth? We're diving into the unseen, not to speculate but to bring clarity where confusion has ruled for too long. And in the next video, we are going to dig even deeper. The third temple, the Antichrist, and the return of Jesus. Could it be connected to the Watcher's final return? Until then, stand in the truth and walk with God, just like Enoch did. Thanks for watching.